Our main character is Yuchai. He's a second-year high school student living a pretty ordinary school life. Every morning, Yuchai wakes up early to deliver newspapers in order to earn some money to support himself. Today, he's working even harder. He needs extra cash for the school trip planned for next month. He and his close group of friends have already made plans to go together, and no matter how expensive it is, he doesn't want to miss out. At school, we meet Yuchai's closest friends. First, there's Saib, the blonde-haired boy. He comes from a wealthy family and doesn't hesitate to lend Yuchai money if needed. But Shiho, their sharp-tongued friend, doesn't like how superior Saib acts sometimes and tells him to tone it down. Then we have Yutori and TJI. They arrive in class and try to get Shiho to ease up on Saib, who they affectionately call their idiot friend. TJI is known as a genius. No one's ever had a bad word to say about him. Yutori, on the other hand, is quiet and has a history of being bullied. Despite their differences, the five of them are close-knit. Yuchai just wishes things could stay like this forever. But then, bad news strikes. Their teacher announces that the 2 million yen collected for the upcoming school trip has been stolen. Shiho begs whoever took it to come clean. She doesn't want this to tear the class apart. But of course, no thief would admit to it just like that. The next day, Shiho and Saib don't show up to school. Since they were in charge of keeping the money safe, people start suspecting that they're the ones who took it. That night, something strange happens. Yuchai receives a letter from Shiho, asking him to meet at the school. He rushes over only to find his 4 friends already there. They each claim Yuchai was the one who asked them to come. When Yuchai checks their letters, he realizes they've all been set up. Suddenly, someone shocks him from behind with a taser. In a haze, he watches as his friends are dragged away. In his half-conscious state, Yuchai recalls the words of 2 important people in his life. His teacher, who said, "The most important thing in life is money," and his mother, who told him, "What really matters is your friends." When Yuchai wakes up, he and the others are trapped inside a white room. A strange doll enters the room. According to Yutori, it's called Manabu, a character from an old anime. The doll wants them to play a game with it. If they win, they'll get back the 2 million yen. Each game they clear will earn them 2 million yen. And if they finish all the games, they'll walk away with 20 million in total, enough to pay off someone's massive debt. Yuchai thinks it's all a joke. But Manabu hints that someone in their group is hiding something. One of them owes 20 million yen. TJI steps up to argue, saying Manabu is committing a crime by holding them there without proof. But then, Manabu reveals that one of them already gave it a 2 million yen deposit to start the game. Which means the person who stole the school trip money is right here. And that person brought them all into this game. They're given a choice. If they refuse to play, the 2 million yen is lost, and the one who owes 20 million must pay it off alone. If they agree to play, the debt is split evenly. Win the game, and the debt is gone. But if they lose, then they'll all be burdened with the full debt. Manabu gives them some time to decide. They eventually agreed that trying to figure out who the traitor was right now wouldn't help anyone. Instead, they chose to participate in the game to help their friend pay off the debt, because that's what friends do. But for Yuchai, the decision wasn't so easy. He struggled internally. What's more important, money or friendship? After a moment of deep thought, he finally made his choice. He chose his friends. The group collectively decided to take part in the game. Then, the first challenge began. In the center of the room was a giant coin placed on a table, along with 5 nameplates, each representing one of them. Inside each nameplate was the amount of debt assigned to that person. Each member had exactly 4 million yen in debt. However, no one was allowed to let others see their debt amount. If they did, it would double. The rules of the game were as follows. All 5 players must place their hands on the coin. Together, they must guide it to the correct answer for a question. If all 5 agree on the same answer, the coin will move smoothly to the correct choice. However, if even one person disagrees, the coin will shift toward the opposing answer. This game prioritizes the minority vote. In other words, it tests their unity. There was another critical rule. No one is allowed to speak, unless it's to read the question. If anyone breaks this rule, their debt will double. and the two players with the highest remaining debt at the end will be forced to take on the entire group's remaining balance. So the key was simple: stick together or suffer the consequences. Saib was chosen to read the first question. It was simple. Is Mount Fuji the tallest mountain in Japan? Everyone knew the answer was yes. But somehow, the coin slid over to the wrong answer. They lost their chance to reduce any debt. Shiho almost blurted something out in frustration, but the others quickly stopped her. If she spoke out of turn, her debt would double. The second question was just as easy, and once again, the answer was obvious. But just like before, the coin moved to the wrong choice. Now it was clear someone was betraying them. Yuchai started to suspect Saib. A few days ago, Saib had flirted with Shiho, only to get punched in the face by her. Maybe this was his way of getting revenge. When Yuchai brought this up to the others, no one responded. They all seemed to avoid the topic. But Shiho had actually forgiven Saib thanks to Yuchai speaking up for him. Back to the game, the third question was read aloud. Easy again. And again, someone sabotaged it. Then came the fourth question, and it was Yuchai's turn to read. But when he opened the card, he realized there was no actual question. Instead, the player had to make one up. Below that was a small note. If you move the coin to yes, the team wins this round. If you move it to no, you the reader get your debt cut in half. In that moment, Yuchai understood everything. That's why the first three questions were so easy. Whoever was reading each time chose no, not because they believed it, but because they wanted to reduce their own debt, even if it meant sabotaging the team. They were planning to push the one with the most debt to the end, forcing them to take on the group's burden alone. Yuchai considered doing the same. For a moment, he wanted to be selfish too. But then he looked at Yutori. She was always quiet, always kind, and easily the weakest among them. If she ended up being last, there was no way she could handle the debt alone. So Yuchai made his choice. He moved the coin to yes, the correct answer. He sacrificed his chance to cut his own debt, to keep the game and his friends moving forward. Yet someone still chose no. Yuchai realized it. Someone was deliberately trying to push all the debt onto Yutori. The last question had no special condition to reduce debt like the previous ones. It was clear. This was a setup. It was Yutori's turn to read the final question. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Will we all still be friends after this?" The supervisors watching from above remarked that this should have been the first question of the game because back then, everyone's answer would have definitely been yes. But now, after all the suspicion and silent betrayals, the answer most likely would be no. Yuchai panicked. He feared that the group's most fragile member Yutori would be emotionally crushed if she saw them turn on each other. So he made a drastic decision. He broke the rules. He spoke out, intentionally increasing his own debt to match Yutori's. He declared that he saw through them all that he knew they were trying to pin the debt on her. He lied, claiming that the actual rule was, the person with the least debt will lose the game. Even if they suspected it was a bluff, no one could be sure, and with the fear of becoming the final scapegoat, no one dared to speak up or challenge him. Because if they did speak, they'd be admitting they were the traitor. After a long silence, Yuchai laughed and said, "Relax, I was just kidding. I believe you'll all answer correctly this time." His psychological play worked. The team united and finally got the answer right. They passed the first challenge. Each of them reported that their debt had only been reduced by 400,000 yen for completing the game. Yuchai claimed his debt stayed the same since he'd activated a note to have it, then broke the rules to double it again. The others accepted it. As they prepared to move on, Manabu announced the second game. But Yuchai lingered behind for a moment, trying to look at the cards used in the first round. All the rule notes had vanished. Suddenly, Shiho returned to speak with Yuchai. She wanted to talk about the traitor. Yuchai suspected Shiho. He reasoned that someone as disciplined as her would never willingly join this game without first trying to find out who caused the debt. And yet, she had chosen to participate. But Shiho, in turn, suspected Yuchai. His financial situation made him a likely suspect, and the fact that she hadn't accused him wasn't out of pity. It was because she loved him. She confessed. Her own debt had already doubled. During the first question, she accidentally made a sound triggering the penalty. She believed that Yuchai had chosen to speak out not just to protect Yutori but to save her, because she was carrying the highest debt at the time. But unbeknownst to them, their entire conversation had been overheard by TGI. Meanwhile, the organizers observed Yuchai's behavior and noted, "This boy is sharp when it comes to money, and his judgment is impressive. But being clever isn't enough to win this game. Someone in this group is trying to destroy their friendship." Then came Game 2. This time, there would be an audience watching from above. The rules: each player must speak badly about one of their friends. Confused, the group didn't understand the objective until Manabu clarified. Each player must enter a room, write down something awful about one of their friends, and place it into a box. Manabu would read each insult aloud, without naming who wrote it. Then, the audience would vote who should move forward the most spaces. The twist: the player who reaches the finish line first inherits all the group's remaining debt, but also gains the right to move on. The other four? They get to leave the game. However, if anyone left their paper blank, everyone would move forward one space, meaning they could all reach the finish line together and proceed to round 3. But of course, the traitor wouldn't stay silent. They'd definitely write something down. Leaving the slip blank now became a risk. The two supervisors watching above laughed. "They've been under observation since the beginning," one of them said. "And we don't believe they can make it to the end as one group. Humans are far too calculating." So they waited to see just how far friendship could really go. Rounds 1 and 2 went surprisingly well. Everyone turned in blank slips, and the group advanced 2 spaces together. But each space they landed on came with a penalty condition, adding even more debt. Then Manabu announced a new rule. All additional debt gained from these spaces will be transferred entirely to the person who finishes first. Suddenly, the pressure skyrocketed. From round 3, everything changed. Someone finally wrote something cruel, an accusation that Shiho was in love with Yuchai, even though she had supposedly dated TJI in the past. The supervisors smirked. There's no better way to ruin a friendship than through romance. Shiho was forced to move forward 5 spaces. The others stayed behind. Saib immediately accused Yuchai of playing games, accusing him of knowing Shiho liked him all along but keeping it to himself. TJI stepped in, telling Saib not to be jealous. He was Shiho's ex, after all. But Shiho clarified, her past relationship with TJI was nothing more than a forced engagement arranged by their fathers, who were old friends. There were no real feelings involved. Still, TJI had genuinely loved her. And now, he couldn't stand to hear Saib speak so carelessly about her. The argument escalated quickly. TJI and Saib began to turn on each other, both suspected of being the one who wrote the insult. TJI, with his brilliant mind, accused Saib of trying to verify the rumors about the love triangle by submitting that cruel remark. He argued, "If I had written that, I'd immediately become a suspect. Why would I sabotage myself?" Before the fight could turn physical, Yuchai stepped between them, urging them to stop. "If you really love Shiho," he said, "don't make her suffer because of it." Meanwhile, Yutori stood silently at the back, jealous, knowing that all 3 boys clearly cared more about Shiho than they ever had for her. Next round, everything fell apart. 3 insults were submitted. The worst one? A confession that Shiho had undergone plastic surgery. Once again, she was the one forced to move forward the most. Yuchai and Saib only advanced by 1 and 2 spaces respectively. The roast session had officially begun. The friend group was starting to crumble. The next round had only 1 insult, but it was devastating. Yutori used to be a sugar baby. The supervisors issued a warning. The following content may be disturbing. Viewers, brace yourselves. Yutori broke down. Her darkest secret had been dragged into the light. She immediately blamed Shiho, the only person who knew her secret. But then, Saib clumsily made things worse, making an ignorant remark about her having sold her body. TJI snapped and punched Saib in the face. TJI asked Yuchai to comfort Yutori, saying, "You're the only one who can reach her right now." After all these rounds, the rankings were starting to solidify. TJI was still in last place. Manabu reminded them of the rules again. But at this point, money and debt had become secondary. The real issue was the emotional destruction happening between them. Finally, Yutori spoke up. She revealed her truth. She had been tormented and bullied for years by classmates, teachers, even adults who turned their backs on her. To stop the abuse, she had to pay her tormentors. She needed money desperately. So she became a sugar baby, meeting an older man for dinners and simple outings. But over time, the man began to ask for more. He pressured her into cosplay and photo shoots, but when he wanted to get intimate, she ran away, claiming she hadn't crossed any lines. The online community didn't believe her, but she still wanted Yuchai to trust her because if Yuchai abandoned her now, she'd be all alone. The supervisor believed that all people are the same. They think that as long as they are pure, they have the right to look down on those considered dirtier than themselves, and this case was no different. Everyone would consider Yutori dirty and blameworthy, yet Yuchai was still willing to accept her past and refused to abandon a friend. He whispered something to Yutori, wanting her to place her trust in him. The supervisor realized that if Yuchai could forgive like that, his own past must be even more horrific than Yutori's. Yutori started to show suspicion towards Shiho and wanted to avoid her. Shiho did know, but only because she had saved Yutori before, and Yutori had told her. Shiho didn't listen too much and had never broken a promise to her friends. The supervisor realized the betrayer had succeeded in dividing everyone, as that person clearly didn't care about money but only about causing discord. That person must now be gloating, as they were the one who stole 2 million from the picnic fund. From the past segment, we learned the culprit was someone in the friend group. Right after stealing from Shiho, they ran into Yutori and got a cut under their eye from her pen. That person was also the only one who knew Shiho had undergone plastic surgery to hide a scar on her cheek. And it was that person who revealed Yutori's secret because they were the one who gave Shiho the keychain with the listening device. That person was none other than Tenji, the one with the scar on his eye. Tenji did this to destroy all of Shiho's relationships so he could have her all to himself. Shiho wanted Tenji to believe she wasn't the one who revealed the secret. Of course, Tenji believed her because he was the real culprit. Among the 5 secrets revealed, the 3 most shocking belonged to Tenji. Tenji had ruined Yutori's trust in Shiho, so now he just needed to do the opposite. He then suggested that Shiho might have been framed by Yutori herself, because Yutori could have self-leaked her own secrets to make Shiho look bad and then monopolize Yuchai, knowing she wouldn't easily win Yuchai from Shiho. Tenji claimed Yuchai was kind-hearted and therefore easily manipulated by pity. Manabu wanted them to continue the game, so Yuchai let Tenji go first. Tenji realized he was at the bottom and would be suspected if no one spoke ill of him. So, Tenji spoke ill of himself to maintain trust with everyone. But when he came back out, Tenji saw Yuchai had just slapped Shiho because Yuchai believed Yutori was the one who slandered herself. To entice Yuchai, Tenji found his plan even easier now that the 2 girls had cut off trust with each other. Shiho believed girls wouldn't hesitate to play dirty to get what they wanted. Yutori brought up Shiho's surgery to argue back, so Shiho then explained about her own surgery, and this brought Shai back into the race to win Shiho. The 2 girls completely lost faith in each other, and Yuchai was forced to stay by Yutori's side, so Shiho no longer trusted Yuchai either. Tenji saw everything as perfect. Not only had he severed the relationship between Shiho and Yutori, but he had also broken Shiho's trust in Yuchai. Tenji seized this opportunity to approach Shiho. She rejected Yuchai and chose to side with Tenji. Manabu wanted them to continue the game, and the remaining 4 went into the room. The result was only 2 negative comments. The first wasn't important, but the second was that Tenji had lied about his real age. He stated he was a year older than them, but had to skip a year of school due to an incident, which is why he was now in the same grade. This secret was only known by Shiho. She was suspected again, but Tenji did this to isolate Shiho, to make her have no one else by her side and thus be forced to follow him. Shiho had to take more steps, but this time, the game allowed her to choose one person to expose a secret, and the audience would vote on whether to forgive or not. If no one forgave, she would have to take steps. Tenji was worried because if Shiho chose him, the organizers would reveal that he was the one who dragged them into this mess. Since he was closest to Shiho, she might choose him to test if he truly wanted to help her. But at this critical moment, Shibe stepped forward to take the blame, wanting to regain Shiho's trust. The game revealed to them that Shibe's father was a corrupt politician. He was guilty of all sorts of political crimes, from affairs and infidelity to embezzlement, and covered up several misdeeds by throwing money around. The supervisor believed this would also cause division, as no parent would want their children to associate with the child of a criminal. Tenji saw an opportunity and wanted to exploit it. Shiho wasn't calculating, as this was only Shibe's father's fault, so he shouldn't be held responsible. Tenji stepped forward and suggested that Shibe might not be clean either, because as the game had revealed, Shibe's father had used money to cover up many things, so it's possible Shibe had committed crimes himself and was covered up by his father. He was completely isolated by the group and received 99% of the audience's votes, so he had to take 9 steps and stood right behind Shiho. Now it was the next round, and Tenji wanted to finish it here and now. After the next round, there was only one negative comment. Shibe had committed murder. Tenji was startled. He hadn't written anything in this round. He thought he had manipulated things enough and wanted to leave it as it was to avoid suspicion. After observing, Yuchai was the one who wrote it. The supervisor felt the fun was just beginning, with Yuchai once again instigating everything. If one paid close attention, Yuchai had indeed brought things to this point. Shibe tried to explain that he had not committed murder, and that it was definitely a lie. Tenji was also certain, as someone like Shibe wouldn't have the guts to kill, so Yuchai must have been lying. Shibe wanted Manabu to punish the liar according to the rules, but this condition would only be met if he could prove his innocence. Anyone could just say they're innocent. Shibe wanted to check criminal records, but even if he had one, his father would have already taken care of it, so it might not even exist anymore. Manabu left the decision to the judges, and even as he desperately pleaded, he foolishly blurted out that if he had done it, his father would have handled everything. This self-inflicted wound caused Shibe to advance 5 more spaces. Yuchai stated that he still trusted Shibe and began his own investigation. He claimed that the betrayer had written all the negative comments since the beginning of the game. He tried to say there was a liar in the group, but couldn't reveal their identity, making Tenji think he was bluffing. But Yuchai explained that this game was not difficult at all because it had an audience. There was no way that advancing a space would always result in being more in debt. If it were truly that disadvantageous, the organizers would always win. If that were the case, even if players completed the game, they'd end up more in debt than when they started, and that wouldn't attract an audience. Besides, this was a Monopoly-style board game, so if there were spaces that increased debt, there would also be spaces to clear it. The evidence was that in the previous round, their debt had been reduced. So, if everyone finished together, the debt and the debt relief would balance out. The problem was that he'd only realized this now, which was too late. But he thought of a way to bring everyone back to equilibrium. Now, except for Shibe who was in the lead, everyone would speak ill of themselves to advance to Shibe's position. If anyone broke the rule and spoke ill of Shibe, they would be exposed for not having a self-slander card. This way, they could stop hurting each other. However, Tenji objected and wanted Yuchai to reveal the betrayer's identity if he knew it, because that way they could force the betrayer to advance to the 3rd game. Tenji alone found him too soft and began to pressure Yuchai. But Yuchai was ready to face it, and when the results were announced, there were negative votes. Since the rules didn't limit the number of votes, his plan failed. It had come to this, so Tenji demanded he reveal the betrayer's identity. Yuchai, helpless, confessed that he had fabricated the betrayer. Trust was broken with Yuchai, just as Tenji had predicted. Tenji now only had to continue with his plan to get revenge on Shiho for taking away what was most precious to him. The game continued until Shiho was on the last space. Now, no matter what, Shiho would take one step to the final game. But the game wasn't over yet, as the supervisor realized Yuchai had become a dangerous manipulator, subtly controlling the game without anyone knowing. Yuchai wanted everyone to work together to find the betrayer. According to the rules, whoever lied would be punished. So, if all 5 of them wrote that they were the ones who registered for the game, they would all be punished and suffer together in the next game. while the betrayer would be left behind and eliminated. Yuchai wanted Tenji to go first because he was the one Shiho trusted the most. Tenji knew he was about to be exposed, so he decided to write what Yuchai wanted and cry hysterically afterwards as an excuse. But when the results were announced, only Tenji had written anything. The others left their blanks. He intended to play the crying act, but Yuchai wanted him to confess everything and save the excuses for later. Yuchai now looked terrifying, completely different from the person they once knew. Yuchai then recounted everything he had orchestrated since the second game began. That was when Tenji started slandering. Yuchai and Shiho had secretly cooperated by using paper from inside the room to communicate. In the third turn, Yuchai had claimed to leave a blank vote, but the camera showed him holding a pen and taking 2 ballots. When he came out, he put his hand on Shiho's shoulder, indicating he had given her something. He wanted her to write a secret that only the 2 of them knew to gain her trust. He had eliminated people to find the betrayer. In Yutori's round, he also secretly gave her a note, telling her that Shiho was on their side, and they should feign arguments to lure the betrayer out. That's why in the next round, Shiho revealed the only secret Yutori knew, thus eliminating 2 people. Shibe was easy because he voluntarily participated in revealing the truth, leaving only Tenji. But to prevent Tenji from going crazy and ruining everything, Yuchai decided to use that flawed plan to trick Tenji, waiting until the game was almost over to expose him. To prevent them from writing multiple votes to sabotage each other, Yuchai had also avoided that by keeping everyone's name tags. Everyone wanted to prove they weren't the betrayer, so they would immediately hand over their name tags. With their name tags as hostages, everyone would obediently follow Yuchai's plan. The supervisor saw Yuchai as incredibly cunning, capable of manipulating human psychology just as religion had done. Tenji wanted to know why Yuchai could eliminate everyone but didn't target him. Yuchai explained that Tenji's behavior was unusual. From being a mediator, he suddenly started arguing with Shibe and claiming he was the one who slandered, even though no one in the group had ever told Shibe any secrets because he was known to be a gossip. Tenji conceded defeat, having chosen an idiot like Shibe to blame. But now, unable to do anything to help Shiho, Yuchai decided to tell Manabu that he had lied, so he could take Shiho's punishment and enter the third game. They confirmed Yuchai's words were true and let him go alone. Yuchai told them that he was the one who lied about Shibe committing murder because, in fact, he was the real murderer. He had killed 3 people and was called a monster by the supervisor. He decided to leave them behind and enter the next round to fight and then destroy both Manabu and the game's management. His friends didn't believe he could be a murderer, but Manabu confirmed his words were true. Everyone started arguing about Yuchai, making him unable to understand his mother's past teaching that friends were more important than money. For Yuchai, his friends were now nothing but a burden, and he decided to go to the third game alone to protect them. But as he was about to jump, Tenji stepped forward, wanting to follow Yuchai to atone for his mistakes. He confessed that he had also lied about his feelings for Shiho, that he had only participated to monopolize Yuchai. He used their first kiss as proof, and the organizers accepted, allowing both to proceed to the next stage. The organizers noted that Tenji surely had a purpose for doing this, as this was his second time participating in this game. Years ago, Yuchai's mother had taught him that the most important thing in the world was friends, not just money. He had dismissed his mother's words because, upon leaving the hospital, Yuchai met his teacher again, who told him that the most important thing in the world was money. Yuchai was then suddenly awakened and found Tenji with him down below. Yuchai wondered where they were, and Tenji wasn't sure either. Suddenly, Manabu's voice echoed, stating that they both needed to stay in this cave for 3 days while the organizers prepared for the third game. They only had water to survive for 3 days. Tenji then had to explain his recent actions. He followed Yuchai because only by going with Yuchai would he have the opportunity to explain everything to him, why he betrayed them and all the other things. Tenji confessed that this was his second time participating in the friendship game. But before he continued, Tenji signaled Yuchai to cover his name tag to prevent any hidden listening devices. Tenji shared that everything that happened was because of Shiho. She had taken away the most precious thing Tenji had in this world. Specifically, in junior high, Tenji had two very close friends. The three of them had once made plans together. Tenji told his two friends that he had saved a large sum of money and wanted to start a business with them to build an empire before they turned 18. His two friends were surprised that Tenji wanted to share this money with them. Tenji, at that time, held the belief that as long as the three of them were together, they would be unstoppable. Then, a year later, Shiho joined their class and attended the same school as Tenji. However, Tenji's business with his two friends hadn't encountered many problems yet. Until one day, the two friends questioned Tenji about whether he was dating Shiho. He confessed that he and Shiho were only set up by their parents, but they still saw each other as just friends. After that incident, the three of them began to manage their money strictly and maintained their initial capital until they entered high school. Once in high school, Tenji's group of three decided to split the money into 3 parts and invest it. Whoever earned the most money before turning 20 would become the company's president. Nothing would have gone wrong if the two friends hadn't added another condition. The president would have the right to confess their feelings to Shiho. Tenji felt at that moment that this would strain their friendship, but he went along with it to prevent it from breaking apart sooner. However, not long after, Tenji and his two friends were dragged into the friendship game because someone owed 10 million yen. All three quickly lost the game, and Tenji was saddled with a 20 million yen debt and sent home. Tenji was not allowed to say anything about the game. He went to confront one of his friends, who revealed that he had used the money to buy gifts for Shiho, but he couldn't say anything more for fear of being eliminated by the game. Not long after, the two friends moved away to live elsewhere, while Shiho gradually put more pressure on Tenji's life. He didn't know who to share and confide in, so he ended up telling everything to the most important person to him, his father. Tenji's father listened to the story and understood his son. He decided to take care of everything for Tenji from then on. However, on that very day, Tenji heard the news that his father had just passed away. The police investigation concluded it was a suicide, but Tenji knew his father would never do such a thing because before leaving the house, Tenji's father had mentioned he would go to Shiho's family to inquire about something. Therefore, he suspected that everything he experienced was related to Shiho. From then on, he began to investigate Shiho more deeply, but nothing came of it. Moreover, he received an anonymous letter demanding that he stop digging into matters related to Shiho, or he would also disappear. That's why Tenji dragged everyone into this friendship game to expose Shiho's true nature. Although Yuchai messed things up, at least Tenji now had some suspicion that Shiho might be the betrayer. Tenji knew Shiho was hiding something big because their current total debt was 10.8 million, whereas according to the information Yuchai had gathered from everyone, their debt should have been 18.8 million. This meant someone had falsified the amount. Yuchai didn't know how Tenji got information about the debt, so Tenji asked Manabu. He asked Manabu again, and it confirmed Tenji's claim. The two then recalculated the debt based on the previously obtained information, and Tenji informed Yuchai of his true debt. The two then recalculated everyone's money after the second game and still found a 4 million difference compared to Manabu's information. Shiho's debt was unusually large, so she must have lied about her own debt. Yuchai thought that if Shiho was truly lying, she must be a professional swindler. However, Yuchai still didn't believe it, as Tenji could also be lying because after the last game, Yuchai realized that their group, in the end, was still just like strangers. Even Tenji didn't suspect that Yuchai himself had committed murder. But why did Tenji follow him? Tenji said that he wanted to avenge his father and destroy this game because Yuchai was the only person he trusted to be able to do it. To regain Yuchai's trust, Tenji proactively showed Yuchai his name tag and his own debt. Tenji immediately doubled his debt for breaking the rules. Tenji genuinely wanted to follow Yuchai. He bowed his head, pleading, and accepted that Yuchai could treat him as a tool. Yuchai wanted the next 3 days to think. 2.5 days later, Yuchai asked Tenji if he had any relationship with Shibe or Yutori. Tenji replied that he saw both of them as outsiders, but Yuchai argued that they were, after all, Tenji's friends. So, he wanted Tenji to apologize to Shibe and Yutori after this incident for dragging them into it. Even if they didn't forgive him, Tenji still had to apologize. If he still felt guilt and remorse, he should just go and apologize. And because Tenji promised to apologize, Yuchai also promised to get Tenji through the third game. Half a day later, both were released from the cave and stepped into a forest. There, they met Manabu again. It informed them that their next game was hide and seek. They would have to compete against that same 5-person team. Tenji didn't understand why they had to play against another team, so Manabu explained that friendship only truly appears when there's an opponent. For example, if Tenji had a friend who was a scoundrel, ready to betray him, while the opposing team was a harmonious 5-person group, then Tenji would inevitably grow envious of the opponents, and trust in his friend would disappear. Both would have to battle that very thought in this game. Therefore, the key to overcoming this stage was to trust one's friends, no matter the circumstances. Manabu then explained the basic rules of the game. One person would hide, and the remaining members of both teams would search. Therefore, the team with fewer members would be at a disadvantage. Since Yuchai's team had argued in the previous game, they were now at a disadvantage, while their harmonious opponents had an advantage. Manabu then gave them more rules for the game, but the most important one was the team switching rule. This rule allowed a person to switch to the opposing team and dump all their remaining debt onto the losing team, while the person who switched could leave with no debt whatsoever. In Yuchai's team's case, simply switching sides would mean an immediate loss. Manabu then gave Yuchai an option. There was an odd one out from another team, and was Yuchai willing to accept this person into his team? He asked if it was a girl, and Manabu confirmed it was, so he immediately accepted. Tenji was worried about letting a stranger into the team, but Yuchai argued that they couldn't possibly win this game with only 2 people, so he had no choice but to accept. The girl accepted into Yuchai's team was Maria, and she was an employee of the game's supervisory staff. They wanted to plant Maria to monitor Yuchai because he had declared that he would destroy the entire system, so the supervisors wanted to see what his plan was. Meanwhile, Tenji decided to be the hider because he wanted Yuchai to remain outside to oversee the game and prevent Maria from having a chance to switch teams. Manabu then gave both teams 2 hours to arrange the hider's position. On their way to find a hiding spot, Tenji mentioned the rules. First, violence was forbidden to force the opponent to reveal the hider's location. Second, the hider must remain still in one spot and not move until the game ended. Violating this rule would result in an immediate loss and double the debt. As for what was allowed, they would be provided with phones to communicate with each other. They also had a food supply station in the middle of the forest. Since the hider couldn't get food themselves, the seekers would have to regularly bring food to the hider. However, the next rule was that the hider had the right to give up, because being the hider meant accepting that they would be alone and couldn't go anywhere until their teammates found the opponent. If the hider couldn't endure the loneliness for too long, they would be given a button. Pressing it would mean the hider had given up, and the entire team would lose. Yuchai then found a hiding spot for Tenji. To be cautious, he positioned Maria far from Tenji's hiding place. Tenji was still worried about their chances of winning this game. Yuchai believed that if both sides played fair, they would surely lose, but if they played dirty, Yuchai was confident he would win. What Yuchai truly cared about was Tenji's endurance, because the longer Tenji could hold out, the easier it would be for Yuchai to win. Tenji was confident in his own resilience, so Yuchai promised not to disappoint him. Yuchai then ran out of time and had to leave, and for the next 2 days, Yuchai didn't come looking for Tenji. Tenji hadn't eaten anything since entering the friendship game, and now he was dying of thirst, causing his mind to spiral into panic. He suspected Yuchai might have abandoned him, but if Yuchai had switched teams, he would have been found long ago. He started to suspect that Yuchai was torturing him as revenge for Game 2. Tenji used his phone to call Yuchai, but unexpectedly, someone from the opposing team answered and told Tenji that Yuchai intended to abandon him as retaliation, just as Tenji had feared. For the past 2 days, Yuchai had only been at the supply station, eating and having fun, with no intention of looking for the hider. Tenji still kept his faith in Yuchai and hung up, but his will was somewhat shaken. Tenji began to grow frantic, simply hoping that Yuchai would soon arrive to explain what had happened. Let's go back 2 days, to the start of the game. The film introduces us to all the members of the opposing team. First, there's the hider and team leader of the opposing team. Next is a young man I'll call Thug. Then, there's a young man considered the team's master seducer, whom I'll call Player. Next is the team's youngest member, Kid. Finally, there's the young man wearing glasses, whom I'll call Straight-Laced. All four had planned because, according to the description, no matter how many people there were, the hider could never be found in this vast forest. Therefore, the key would be for the seeker to deliver food to the hider. So, they decided to assign people to guard the food supply station. The leader assigned Thug and Player to guard the supply station, while Kid and Straight-Laced would go find a hiding spot for him. The entire team then performed a ritual to boost their unity. Two supervisors also made a bet with each other about which team would win. And 3 days later, nothing remarkable happened, but the opposing team's supervisor was confident that Tenji was about to press the button. This was because the nature of the game, as the 5-person team had discovered, was that finding the hider was secondary. The main task was to guard the supply station and wait for the disadvantaged team to bring food to their hider, then follow them. The other team had 5 people and had even been on the same soccer team, so their physical stamina was excellent, and they could follow Yuchai and Maria at all times. They could also take turns to guard Yuchai and deliver food to their leader, so as long as they guarded Yuchai long enough and waited for Tenji to press the button, the game would end. That night, the two supervisors discovered that Tenji had started hallucinating from hunger, imagining Yuchai bringing him food. As for Yuchai, for the past nearly 3 days, he had just been sitting at the supply station, eating, drinking, and having fun as if nothing was happening. However, they still knew Yuchai was plotting something because Maria reported to them that Yuchai was crazier and more terrifying than they thought. Yuchai then suddenly announced that he wanted to switch to the other team. The supervisor knew Yuchai was an egalitarian, willing to use both men and women as tools. Everyone thought that if Yuchai switched sides, he would definitely devise some plot to cause havoc. However, once he switched sides, Tenji would lose and shoulder all the debt. Despite victory being within reach, the other team still wanted to ask their leader for his opinion on letting Yuchai join the team. Yuchai then laughed, because this group couldn't even make a simple decision on their own. They asked their leader about everything, making him feel that this team was just full of people who only knew how to be controlled. Thug got angry and wanted to punch Yuchai, but everyone held him back, because if they resorted to violence, their entire team would surely lose for violating the rules. Thug calmed down and told Kid to call the leader. The blonde supervisor thought that they just needed to let Yuchai join their team to win. But Kid returned and refused to let Yuchai join, because they wanted to play it safe and steady. If Yuchai truly intended to switch teams, Maria would also have to follow, as they didn't want Yuchai to switch, learn the opposing team leader's location, and then report it to Maria. Thug then provoked them, wanting Yuchai and Maria to switch teams. However, 2 days earlier, Yuchai had told Maria about his plan for the next 2 days and that he would switch teams on the 3rd day. If successful, he would get information about the enemy team's hiding spot and give it to Maria. But if he failed, he would find another way. Nevertheless, he wanted to be sure that Maria was willing to put her trust in his plan. He then asked Maria something that truly excited her, as she now knew he was a crazier scoundrel than she thought. Yuchai then decided to change his mind and no longer wanted to switch teams. It wasn't because his plan had been seen through, but because he had found a way to win. Earlier, he had mentioned that for the 2 days he waited at the supply station, he would pretend to do nothing. But in reality, he wanted to be there to converse and provoke the enemy team to gather some information. The next morning, while Kid and Straight-Laced were delivering food, Thug and Player stayed behind to guard. Player confided in Thug for a moment and decided to go look for Maria to monitor her. Yuchai sat up and chatted with Thug, beginning to praise how harmonious his team was. But Thug always considered himself a burden to his leader, and had even caused the leader injuries a few times. Therefore, he always tried to train to improve his own skills. Yuchai meandered and asked who was responsible for the debt that got them all into this game. Player quickly returned and swapped places with Thug to prevent information leakage. Thug then went to guard Maria and discovered she was gone. Thug was startled, thinking Maria had gone to deliver food, so he ran to follow her. But he then found Maria bathing nearby and, blushing, immediately ran away. Just as he returned to Yuchai's spot and hadn't yet calmed down, Yuchai shouted to signal Maria to move. Both then split up and ran to separate Thug and Player in two directions. But in the end, all four regrouped on one path and chased each other. While running near a cliff, Yuchai intentionally pushed Maria down the cliff, surprising everyone watching because even Maria hadn't anticipated this. Tenji was now mentally and physically exhausted. He had intended to press the button, but then gave up, because Tenji knew he no longer wanted to betray anyone. So, he would use his last bit of strength to trust Yuchai. And indeed, Yuchai arrived just in time and helped Tenji, bringing him back to life from the brink of death. After eating and drinking sufficiently, Yuchai told Tenji why he had only now come to deliver food. However, from the beginning, he hadn't told Tenji the true nature of this game, partly to test Tenji's willpower and trust. And now, he completely trusted Tenji and was happy that Tenji hadn't pressed the button and risked trusting him. Tenji now realized that things were harder than he thought. But was Yuchai sure they would win? Yuchai believed that his ability to deliver food to Tenji proved that the plan was halfway successful. Meanwhile, Maria had now been rescued by two members of the opposing team. She knew Yuchai would use her as bait to lure the opponent, but she couldn't have imagined that Yuchai would push her into danger just to ensure that the other two would focus entirely on her. At that moment, if Thug hadn't reached out and caught her, Maria would have truly fallen down the cliff. Player wanted to chase Yuchai, but Thug argued that he couldn't pull Maria up alone, so he chose to stay and help Thug. Although the plan wasn't truly perfect, at least Yuchai had bought time to figure out more ways to deal with the opposing team. Tenji thought Yuchai's recent action was quite reckless, but Yuchai knew very well that if one person stayed, the other would follow. He hadn't spent the past 3 days just draining Tenji's energy. He had carefully observed the personalities and relationships among the opposing team members, and the person Yuchai found to be the kindest in the group was Thug. Although he was rough and hot-headed, he was also the most compassionate and carried considerable guilt from his past. At the same time, he cared a lot about girls, so he would definitely stop to save Maria. What made him certain that Player would also stay with Thug was his observation that Player always stuck with Thug. He reacted to all of Thug's actions, was good at many things but didn't excel at anything, and had a rather superficial lifestyle, so he would immediately listen to someone more straightforward. Yuchai believed he had finished the food delivery part, so now he would have more time to act, and he decided to destroy the opposing team's friendship, because the seeds of discord had already been sown by Yuchai within the opposing team, and that was Maria. Upon returning to the camp, Thug continuously caused a ruckus and argued loudly with Player. He then decided to switch to Yuchai's team to protect Maria. Earlier, after rescuing Maria from the cliff, she had thanked Player because she was still angry at Thug for the peeking incident earlier. Thug panicked and bowed his head in apology, but she smiled and forgave him, also stating that she owed Thug her life for saving her. The other two didn't know what Yuchai was thinking with his recent actions. Maria still tried to speak up to defend Yuchai, which made Thug start to feel uneasy. He then saw Maria was in pain, so he bent down to carry her on his back. On their way back to the supply camp, Maria praised Thug as a kind person and cursed fate for putting her on Yuchai's team. The two members of the opposing team who were out delivering food had now also returned and heard the story, so instead of blaming Thug, they decided to play the long game with Yuchai. Yuchai also returned to the supply camp at this time and bluntly, with a growl, told Maria to come sit next to him. Yuchai declared that if they wanted to play the long game, he would play it with them. Thug wanted Yuchai to let go of Maria because of what he had just done. But Yuchai clearly showed himself to be a dictator who could do whatever he wanted with his teammates. Thug was furious and wanted to beat Yuchai up, but Maria stopped him, stating that this was what Yuchai wanted. Yuchai stood up and grabbed Maria's hair violently, causing the opposing team to protest to Manabu, but it claimed that the rules only forbade violence against opponents, not teammates. So Thug came up with a plan. He would switch to Yuchai's team to protect Maria. But Player smelled trouble and suggested that this might be Yuchai's trick. Yuchai also noticed that Player had quite good experience with girls. However, Thug still didn't believe that Maria being harmed was fake. Player and Thug began to physically fight, with Player claiming that Thug was just a virgin who knew nothing about women. Kid had to step in and stop the two from fighting. Kid wanted to call the leader to see what decision would be made, but Yuchai taunted Thug, saying he was a coward for waiting for the leader to decide, even to protect a girl. Thug then decided to sort things out with the leader himself, so Kid went with Thug to meet the leader to discuss. Yuchai had a concrete plan for this situation, because the leader was the linchpin for every member of the team. Without that linchpin, Player and Thug would easily clash. He calculated that Thug would try to persuade Maria to switch teams, but she would trick him by claiming Yuchai was threatening her. In the easiest scenario, Thug would lose control and punch Yuchai, thus violating the rules. If not, Yuchai would gradually lure Thug to his team. A few hours later, Thug and Kid returned, and Thug now decided to switch sides to Yuchai's team. Of course, Yuchai immediately agreed, as the leader had not allowed Maria to switch to their team. Thug was willing to take on more debt, but had no intention of cooperating with Yuchai. Thug believed he now had the right to punch Yuchai without holding back. But Yuchai was not the type to be bullied by a Thug. He quickly subdued and tied Thug in one place so he couldn't resort to violence. That night, Yuchai informed Tenji that he had successfully lured an opponent to switch teams. Now he just needed to force Thug to reveal the leader's location. Thug now felt deeply ashamed for trying to help Maria and ending up like this. Maria was worried about Thug because Yuchai would surely torture him for information, but Thug claimed he could endure it, and even if tortured, it would be useless because he didn't know the leader's hiding place. Yuchai was shocked, then went outside to ask Thug about how he had clearly gone to meet the leader with Kid earlier. But on the way, Kid had only said that he realized Yuchai had some sort of scheme, so he just called the leader and then returned with Thug. Yuchai now realized and called Kid. He understood that Kid was the true leader and mastermind of this team. Yuchai was happy that he had realized this sooner, but Kid stated that Yuchai was too late, because the moment he accepted Thug into his team was the moment he invited a bomb onto himself. Kid would soon end this battle and hoped Yuchai would soon realize why Thug was a bomb. Kid then bid farewell to the leader and began searching for Tenji. The two supervisors now learned that Kid was a child prodigy and had a weakness for getting bored easily. That's why they participated in this game, to find more enjoyment. And the reason Kid could manipulate the leader must have been because he discovered the leader had some secret. Yuchai now realized why Thug was a bomb. If Thug were to hit his former teammates, Yuchai's team would violate the rules and lose. And by tying Thug up here, it meant Yuchai had to stay here and supervise Thug the entire time, losing track of the opponent's movements. However, Straight-Laced and Player had actively sought them out to monitor Yuchai. The group waited until morning, and Maria left for a moment. Maria ran into Kid, and he recognized her as someone from the management team. He therefore wanted Maria to betray Yuchai. The reason he recognized Maria was that throughout the 3 days of confinement, Yuchai and Tenji looked utterly worn out, but Maria didn't have a single speck of dirt on her, which was highly suspicious. However, Maria didn't want to betray them because she had to maintain her image as a sweet girl. So, Kid asked her if she wanted to see an arrogant Yuchai utterly helpless. She really wanted to see that, so she decided to call Yuchai to ask for Tenji's location, as she was alone and unsupervised at the moment. Yuchai told her, and Maria immediately returned to inform Kid, which infuriated him because he felt betrayed. The entire opposing team then set off to find Tenji. Kid called Tenji and told him to cut ties with Yuchai as soon as possible, but Tenji still faithfully trusted Yuchai. However, immediately after, Kid discovered Tenji. Manabu then announced the game was over, and everyone in the forest had to gather at the supply station. Manabu then officially declared Yuchai's team the winner of this hide-and-seek game. Kid was shocked to hear this and didn't understand why. It was true that Kid had found Tenji first, but that wasn't the only way to win. The leader had pressed the surrender button before the hide-and-seek game ended. Yuchai had actually pretended to be furious to lure the entire opposing team away, leaving him alone with Thug. He confessed that he never wanted to win this way. Yuchai then called the leader and demanded he press the surrender button. Otherwise, he would punch Thug until he pressed it. He punched repeatedly, but the leader wondered why Thug wasn't saying anything. Yuchai put Thug on the phone, and he told the leader not to give up. Thug was very stubborn, enduring every punch, so Yuchai decided to escalate. He had heard that they used to be on the same basketball team, and Thug once made a bad throw that injured the leader. Therefore, Yuchai would break each of Thug's fingers until the leader pressed the button. Yuchai counted down from 10, and then a cracking sound echoed. Someone who had been injured like the leader certainly wouldn't mishear that sound. He started crying and wanted Yuchai to stop, but Yuchai would continue breaking fingers until he pressed the surrender button. Yuchai also figured out that it was the leader who caused the debt for the entire group and forced them into this game. The leader apologized to the group because his family's business was in debt, which was why he had to drop out of school. Since he still wanted to participate in the final tournament with the team, Kid had guided him to join this game and let him direct everything. Even though they lost, at least the leader wanted to beat Yuchai up to avenge Thug. But Thug stopped him because none of his fingers were actually broken. Yuchai himself had broken his own hand to scare him. Kid was unwilling to accept defeat and began to scold the leader and Thug. But Straight-Laced grabbed Kid and spanked his bottom to punish him. Straight-Laced was everyone's ideal older brother figure, and the only one who could control Kid. Straight-Laced believed that if the leader put Thug in danger just to win, they wouldn't respect him anymore. The whole team then continued, and the leader promised to shoulder all the debt if they lost, and even if he couldn't play basketball with them anymore, he was satisfied because this game had served as the tournament he wanted. Yuchai then also knew that Maria was from the management team from the beginning, which was why he felt comfortable pushing her down the cliff without any worries. And his act after Maria's betrayal was also to make the opponents complacent and leave. Yuchai was then helped up by Tenji. Tenji admitted that even though Yuchai used despicable tactics, he didn't destroy the opponent's friendship. However, if the leader had pressed the button later, he might have actually broken Thug's hand. Both were then allowed by Manabu to leave so the organizers could prepare for the fourth game, and neither was allowed to reveal any information about the game, or they would face consequences. Both then left and decided to find Shiho. But upon arriving at school, they encountered Yutori there. She was very happy that both had returned, but she also informed them that Shiho had run away. Yuchai thought Shiho had run away because she knew they had discovered Shiho lied about the debt. Yutori added that the day after the group returned from the second game, Shiho, she, and Shibe went to school as usual. However, the entire class questioned Shiho, suspecting she was the one who stole the picnic money. This was because all other classes kept their money in bank accounts, but Shiho insisted on keeping cash. Shibe wanted to reveal that Tenji was the real culprit, but that would violate the rule about disclosing game information, so Shibe remained silent. Everyone thought Shibe was an accomplice, so he offered to compensate the entire class. However, 2 days later, Shibe's father was arrested because someone had revealed information about him after his exposure in the second game. Yuchai presumed Shibe must have told his father about the game to ask him for the 2 million, which led to his arrest. The next day, Shibe apologized to everyone for not being able to bring the money, and he was bullied. Shiho, in turn, protected Shibe, leading both of them to stop attending school. Suddenly, a classmate came to inform them that something had happened at Shibe's house. Shibe's father had been murdered, and Shibe was arrested by the police, his body covered in blood. When Shibe met Yuchai and Tenji, he tried to explain to his 2 friends that he hadn't done anything. Tenji wanted to speak up for Shibe, but Yuchai stopped him, as it would reveal game information. Tenji then saw Shiho's father escorting Shibe away, which confirmed that he was connected to the game. But Yuchai stopped him from speaking, and Shiho's father also advised them not to meddle in other people's affairs. Yuchai, having no one important to him, declared that if they wanted to threaten anyone, they should target him directly. Yutori then came to question both of them, but Yuchai spoke harshly, claiming Yutori viewed him as a monster after learning the truth about him, yet was now pretending to care. He stated frankly that she was incapable of making her own decisions and had been a burden to the group since the game began. That night, upon returning home, Yuchai believed he acted that way to push Yutori as far away from everything as possible because he didn't want her to be in danger. But suddenly, an unknown number called, and the caller revealed they had kidnapped Yutori. They demanded Yuchai come to participate in a game. If he came, he would be severely tortured. But if he didn't, Yutori would still be tortured, though less than what he would endure. However, Yuchai was not allowed to bring anyone with him, or Yutori would bear the full brunt. Yuchai declared that they were not to lay a hand on Yutori, or he would kill them all. Yuchai then went alone to the rendezvous point. He encountered a group of thugs holding Yutori captive, and a masked figure wearing a Manabu mask, who introduced himself as Kuroki. Yuchai wanted him to release Yutori first, but Kuroki showed him that he was in charge here. He threatened to reveal Yuchai's secret, and if he did, Yuchai would surely reconsider saving Yutori. Yuchai had no choice but to compromise and listen to the rules Kuroki laid out. Yuchai would now have to go through 3 rounds of torture, but there was a way to save Yuchai. Yutori would have to endure the torture in his place. If Yutori accepted the punishment, she would receive a lighter penalty than Yuchai. However, if Yuchai spoke up, both would be punished. In other words, Yutori was the one who made the choice. In the first round, both would receive a punch from the muscular man. If Yutori accepted, she would only take 1 punch. For Yuchai, it would be 3 punches. If Yutori didn't make a choice, it would default to Yuchai. As she hesitated, Yuchai signaled to her that he would take the blows. Kuroki didn't want Yuchai to move, but he condescendingly allowed Yuchai to take the punches alone. Yuchai endured 3 continuous blows but found them still light compared to the punches from the leader earlier. Yutori promised that for the second round, she would take the punishment for Yuchai. So Kuroki immediately pulled Yutori's hand onto the table, wanting her to accept having a fingernail pulled out. She was immediately pulled until she bled and started feeling pain, so Yuchai had to put his hand forward to take her place. However, he would have 3 fingernails pulled out. Yuchai wanted him to do it quickly, so Kuroki didn't hesitate and pulled out 3 of Yuchai's nails. Yuchai now wondered why all of them let this perverted sadist be their leader. Kuroki claimed he was the smartest, which was why he was the leader. He was also the bravest and the one who wouldn't betray his friends. He then wanted to play the final game. Either Yutori would have to jump naked, or Yuchai would be stabbed in the hand 3 times with a knife. They had 1 minute to discuss. Yutori, though still very scared, was willing to follow Yuchai's choice. So Yuchai decided to take the punishment, making Yutori feel even more guilty. Yuchai then endured 3 knife stabs and was allowed to leave. But Yuchai didn't want to leave. He wanted to continue playing. He told Yutori not to feel too guilty because she was their victim, and they had only targeted him from the start, which was why they kidnapped her to threaten him. Yutori was no longer afraid of Yuchai, no matter what his past was. Yutori then bandaged Yuchai's hand, and he told her that if she didn't leave, she would witness something very scary, but she still chose to stay with Yuchai. He declared that he wanted to play a game with Kuroki. If he agreed to play, Yuchai would pay him 10 million, and if he knew about Yuchai's past, he must know Yuchai had more than 10 million. So Kuroki accepted the bet, and the game would simply be rock, paper, scissors. If Kuroki won, Yuchai would pay him 10 million. If Yuchai lost, he would lose a number of fingers corresponding to what Kuroki threw. 2 fingers for scissors, an entire hand for paper. If Kuroki threw rock, he would lose nothing. And with a hand like this, Yuchai would only throw rock or paper, a very good deal for him. If he accepted, Yuchai would give his thugs extra money as a reward. The thugs cheered, urging Kuroki to participate. He couldn't be a coward and back down, so he thought he only needed to throw paper to win or draw. So he asked Yuchai what would happen if it was a draw. Yuchai said nothing would happen, but if Kuroki threw scissors, the odds would be 50-50ths, and he didn't want to risk losing 2 fingers. Yuchai read that Kuroki intended to throw paper, so he reminded him that he also wouldn't throw paper, and then urged him to start. Both then threw rock. However, in the second round, Yuchai threw scissors using his other hand. Kuroki lost and began to argue with Yuchai, but as Yuchai had said, he wouldn't throw paper, but he never said he would only play with 1 hand. Kuroki wanted to cancel the bet and had his thugs rush to grab Yuchai. But at that moment, Tenji brought the real game organizers. They quickly apprehended the imposters, and the supervisor of Yuchai's team wanted to take Kuroki away for punishment for impersonating them. However, Yuchai wanted to keep him to take 5 fingers before he was arrested. When he refused, the supervisor held his hand for Yuchai to do it quickly. He started screaming, so Yuchai stopped and let him choose one of his thugs to take his place. But the thug would only lose 1 finger. Kuroki wailed and told his thugs to take it for him, but obviously, none of them dared. Yuchai then passed out from blood loss, so the supervisor took Kuroki away. She believed Yuchai had intentionally thrown scissors from the start by using his injured hand to deceive him, and then misled him so he wouldn't think of a draw. Moreover, in just 1 game, Yuchai had also destroyed the bond between Kuroki and his accomplices. Yuchai was then taken for medical treatment. Maria informed Tenji that in the next game, they would have to choose between saving Shibe or taking on an additional 500 million in debt, as Shibe had accumulated another 500 million in debt after his father's death. Yuchai regained consciousness and wanted to save Shibe, while also exposing this game, because money was not important to him. Yuchai was then rushed to emergency care, while Tenji and Yutori decided to do their best to bring Shibe back. And thus, part 1 of the story concludes.